what is our special sauce? What do we have that none of the other players actually have? And what can we leverage in the current market and the position we're in?
The water's fine, homie, jump into the deep end. Sow it, you will reap it. We talking how to start it, how to grow it, how to keep it. Take a deep breath. You are now rocking with Founder Secrets.
Peter, you're CEO of Gust. Welcome to Founder Secrets.
Thanks so much for having me. Super psyched to be here.
Yeah, psyched to have you. So I think it's kind of a funny story and maybe we start here. So a lot of the people we have on the pod are, they started the company, they founded the company, but Gust is 20 years old, right? You have a very interesting story in how you got to the position you're in today.
Yeah. So, I have kind of a non-traditional path that's been kind of fun and allowed me to kind of fill the role of founder without having to take on the classic risks of founders, which is certainly a privileged position, I will say. But I've been at Gust for 10 years, which is an extraordinarily long lifetime for somebody working in startups. I started as a software developer when I was looking for kind of a larger startup to work with to see like, okay, am I really good at software development? Let's jump in with more people. So I joined the team and ended up leading the development team. And one of the beautiful things about Gust is that it always gave me new problems to solve and was very amenable to me, crossing disciplinary boundaries to solve those. So as the technical team started humming and there was good culture there, started to realize, oh, the real problems are in product. So I got to start to straddle that line and then started leading product after getting mentorship from some great product people, worked in product for a while. And then through the trajectory of the company, we hit a point about 4 years ago where the current CEO was like, we were good buds, worked together a lot. He's like, hey, I don't think that this is for me anymore. Do you want to do it? My background was in software engineering. I came from playing music, like very art brain person, and had never really considered running a company. But obviously all the software we build is geared towards making that easier for people who don't have that experience or background. So at that point I was like, okay, I think I've learned enough. I think I want to do this. So at that point I decided to take over as CEO.
So before we get there, it sounds like you were in music before. I'm curious, and you switched to engineering. I'm curious, and this ties into our icebreaker. Is what was your first job, first real job, if you will?
So to back up a little bit, I went to school thinking I was going to major in music and become an architect by building my own scholastic program at Boston University. I was in sight singing and ear training.
You studied music?
I did.
And you thought music would lead to being an architect?
No, I just wanted to do both because I was crazy and idealistic, right? I discovered computer science because I was in the wrong class and I had to transfer out. So I took CS 111 and I was like, this is cool. I love this. And that's how I got into computer science. But that was all before startups. Or before I knew what startups were. This was in 2004, 2005. I had no idea about that ecosystem.
Back then, they just called them businesses.
Yeah. So I moved to New York with a bunch of musicians and hung out in New York because New York is an amazing place. And then as I lived in New York longer, it became obvious that to stay there, I was going to have to find myself a real job. My goal at that point was to work, 20 hours a week and leverage my degree in computer science. And I found an amazing guy who had moved over from Germany and opened up a subsidiary of his company called Brain Transfer. And I found that job and we started working together. We built websites for Kirsch, a custom blinds company, the Asian American Art Center in New York City. And I kind of learned on the job PHP and MySQL and how to actually construct a web application on a LAMP stack. And just kind of learned on the fly. And then we merged with a design and development firm called Blank Mosseri because Adam Mosseri was leaving to join Facebook. We merged with Blank Mosseri and I took over kind of his development role there. And we built websites for a variety of companies. And then a few years into that, I ran into a friend from school who was also in New York. And he told me about this music startup that he just started working for. And I said, what's a startup? And he told me. And at that point, I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'm going to go work at startups.
That's cool. What was your first real job, Taylor?
So also in engineering, actually. So I also built websites as my first job. I wanted to buy a cell phone. My mom wouldn't buy me one. And so I needed to make money. And I was, I used to I taught myself HTML and Visual Basic. VB was big back then. And and so I learned those things, and then I was out riding my bike. I didn't have a car because couldn't afford a cell phone, couldn't afford a car either. And then I biked to this place that had a sign on the door that I won't say the company name, but it was a small company in Kentucky that built websites. And I emailed him on a Sunday and said, hey, I was 15. I emailed him and said, hey, can I get a job? And then he said, why don't you come in on Tuesday? So I went in there wearing my little polo shirt. And I was so proud because I was going to show them my website that I built. And of course, the website went down that day. So when I showed up, they couldn't access the website. The website was for a gaming clan, Counter-Strike gaming clan that I was very proud of. And so he was like, well, he seems smart enough. Why don't you join? The lesson I learned from that business, I was there for a year and a half, 2 years maybe. The lesson I learned is the power of lying. So the guy, and this is why I'm not going to say the name of the business, the guy and gal who ran the business, the husband and wife, unbelievable liars. Just, I've never met people who could lie out of one and believe it. They believe their lies. That was what I learned. They believed everything they said with such confidence. And it was a very valuable lesson because it taught me I never want to be like that. I don't want to be that type of person that, you get caught in these lies, and it was a toxic place. But I am very grateful for, I met one of my co-founders of my first business there. I'm very grateful for the experience, and including, learning not to lie. What about you, Flavio?
My first job was sommelier, which is a wine expert / waiter at a restaurant. I wanted a job as a waiter. Believe it or not, it's actually kind of hard to get a job as a waiter. I guess any job as your first job is really hard because the first question they ask, well, do you have any experience as a waiter? And I'm like, no, this is my first job. No point. I thought you guys understood this. And they were like, no, you need, there's people with experience here. So restaurant after restaurant just kept turning me down. And then I went to the school. I just heard of this school called Johnson and Wales. It's for restaurateurs and chefs and high-class waiters. And so I just called and asked them just about, if they can help me get a job. And they're like, no, we're a school. Okay, great. And then I called the next restaurant and I said, Johnson and Wales told me to call you because they thought I would be a great waiter for you. And when the guy heard, oh, you're from Johnson & Wales, he assumed I actually had some credibility, which led to me actually getting a waiter job, which I think is like a little fake it till you make it, even to get a waiter job. Like it was like Anyway, so I had to push the envelope a little bit to get that job.
I love it. All right. So you were
Gust.com.
Yeah.
Dude, 4-letter domain.
Yeah, for real.
What? So did you kill the founders? What happened? How did you?
So, I mean, here's the kicker is that Gust was founded by David S. Rose, who literally wrote the book on angel investing, but also on starting a startup. It's called the Startup Checklist. So David founded Gust originally as administrated software for angel groups because David also founded New York Angels.
Sorry, I just want to know that in Charlotte, I was in an angel group that I personally used Gust. I've signed documents and became part of this group, made investments 10, 12 years ago via Gust in Charlotte, North Carolina, and loved the experience. It was like an angel list back then. I feel like you guys were like the only game in town almost with respect to that whole angel list, Carta, all these companies that are now valued at tens of billions of dollars. Anyway, back to you. Sorry, that was my experience.
Yeah, so David is still involved. David's our executive chairman. He has coached me, from being somebody who thought about software development to somebody who thought about how to build a business and how to tie, giant ideas to what the actual next step for a growing business is. It's been a phenomenal learning experience over the past decade, and especially over the past 4 years.
So it seems like you guys pivoted, or did you pivot, right? Because you used to manage kind of angel groups. And so how has the business evolved over the years?
Sure. So, Gust really started when the whole ethos behind startups was get everybody to use it and figure it out later. And that was really the play. was to get all angel groups using Gust. And for a long time, that was our entire focus. We continued to do that, but all that software was free. Really, what we did first was build software for angel groups. That obviously attracts the entrepreneur funnel. So we started to work a little bit more on the founder side, building software for them to basically use their company profile as a common application to angel groups and accelerators. Built some more free software for founders around benchmarking ideas, understanding how to split equity between co-founders, all of the things that kind of happen before you make the leap. Obviously realized at some point that this company needs to start making money. So our first kind of foray into paid products and SaaS products was building an incorporation, formation, and early legal solution for companies. And that's when Gust Launch was born. Gust Launch was our primary kind of SaaS product for a very long time. And, when I took over, we looked at the whole suite of things. We're like, okay, what is our special sauce? What do we have that none of the other players actually have? And what can we leverage in the current market and the position we're in? And we decided at that point that what we wanted to attempt to build was a bottoms up ecosystem. So, most companies that play in this space target people at Series A and beyond, and they capture that value when companies have a good deal of money. And, we learned in this market that was a pretty smart play. Like that is how Carta became a $1 billion valued company. We'll see if that valuation holds. That's what the theory was for a lot of these companies. And that worked very well in the ecosystem as it was for the last decade or so, especially in the last 5 or 6 years. I think we've seen a correction now. So our big bet is that essentially the rest of the country forms the last startup ecosystem in the United States. Right. I don't think there's going to be another Silicon Alley or Silicon Valley. Just the volume of people who are doing this type of stuff in each individual locality isn't enough to have a self-sustaining ecosystem. So our thesis now is to build kind of the infrastructure, both educational support and software, to support the rest of the United States and connect them as a startup ecosystem.
Did this thesis come about because you lived in New York for 11 years, 12 years, and then moved to Nashville? Did those kind of timelines coincide, or did they have nothing to do with each other? You left Silicon Alley in a way. Is that the way you kind of see it? You left one of those big hubs, but there's tons of talent throughout.
Yep.
I'm from Louisville, not far from Nashville, and there's tons of talent in these cities. Were those tied together or not at all?
Certainly a little bit. I think, David's big idea was that all of this would be tied together. Always has been, right? But I think understanding the concretion of that idea and what the actual problems were, like why didn't this all take off in the way that we thought it was going to? What are the actual blockers? I think I've learned quite a bit more about that, having moved from New York to what I would classify as an emerging ecosystem that is close to other ones like Louisville, like Nebraska, all of these places that I see trying to do similar things. We worked with a university down in Florida trying to do something similar, and now really understanding what the actual core issues are in terms of growing and mobilizing an ecosystem.
What are those issues?
Well, I think a lot of it is educational. When we see what's happening in Nashville, a ton of the investment cycle for healthcare companies is established and it works. The investment life cycle for companies outside of healthcare in Nashville is way less coalesced and efficient. So pure tech companies in Nashville sometimes have a hard time getting funding in Nashville. So they start to look at other places that have established practices funding pure technology businesses outside of healthcare. Obviously, that's not the ideal for an ecosystem as it's trying to emerge. So then there's all of these second order questions of like, okay, what is the support? The healthcare funnel works because a lot of healthcare is funded through grants and through universities until a certain point in the company life cycle when there's a lot more to look at and say like, okay, we're willing to bet on this working. And the amount of capital at that point and the amount of risk at that point are different than a pre-seed technology-based startup that's like, hey, we need some money to build a software product. So understanding what are the service providers actually going to be capable of supporting that company at a pre-seed software standpoint. It's very different than at a healthcare company that has gone through like 2 rounds of NSF funding and is now looking at a giant VC check. Polar opposite, right? So how do we educate providers? How do we fill in the gaps where, providers can't efficiently, given their business model, engage with companies? How do we foster that engagement before it is theoretically feasible given their current business model. Where do we plug in? How do we educate investors about deploying capital into angel investment? How do we provide the infrastructure for people to connect and for companies to kind of work through an ecosystem from incubation to first investment? So breaking down all those barriers, how to do it, how to get people comfortable being involved, and how to stitch together the organizations that are already operating to help them kind of flow companies through them.
You mentioned NSF funding. What is NSF funding?
A National Science Foundation. So there's a whole bunch of grants available through the government, through the ESPER and STTR program and the NSF, the National Science Foundation, that are meant to foster innovation in medical, in healthcare, in Department of Defense and military. There is money available in those places for companies if the goal and the mission of the company overlap with something that the US government is also incentivized to fund and try to bring into the world.
Did you guys raise venture capital?
Yeah, Gust has through its life cycle. We are currently not raising. My mandate when I took it over was like, let's get Default Alive and then figure it out from there. So that's where we are now.
Default Alive meaning profitable.
Yes.
How long has Gust been around?
Going on 20 years.
How do you reconcile venture funding with a 20-year, right? Because VCs tend to want 7-8 year return or get out. How are you able to keep the wolves at bay?
We have a magic human being, right? So David S. Rose is a magical human. There's really no other way to describe it in terms of breadth of knowledge, connections, individual pedigree. So David is responsible very much for navigating the company through the difficulties and navigating that change in trajectory for the company.
On the other hand, it seems like, and I used your product and I loved it, and I'm trying to figure out why has it been that you see companies like Carta or AngelList take off. My initial instinct would be like, oh, it's a venture. They have more money, so they can spend more on sales. But maybe that's wrong. You guys have venture capital too. And I guess you could have raised more if you wanted to. So I guess, why do you think those companies seem like they've accelerated so much more in your space?
I think that they made the decision to target companies with money before we did. Philosophically and mission-wise, Gust has always endeavored to support companies earlier than everybody else would. That was a bet that didn't work well for us for a long time in terms of growing the business and revenue. Fundamentally, that decision over the course of the lifetime of the company, the decision not to charge for some of our core products and the decision to continue to focus earlier were some of the things that made it more difficult for us to grow on the typical venture trajectory.
So let's go back to kind of what we started with. I jumped too fast into skip the icebreaker initially, but we kind of started with music, architecture, engineering development, and now running product, and then running the company, really. As part of that path, and you kind of spoke to this at the very beginning, as part of that path, were there ideas where you said, okay, if I'm going to take this over, there's an edict or that there are some changes I'm going to make, or there's a vision that I have for the way Gust can be. Is that kind of how it happened, or did that come about, through David and others, this kind of mentorship? It just kind of naturally came about. I guess the question is, how did you kind of transition from being engineering focused to running a company focused?
It's been a bumpy journey. David and I have always had really interesting conversations. And I think I have always pulled him away from traditional VC and made him defend that model. And he has always pulled me back around the realities of how that business operates. So, over the past 5 years, especially when I took over, I did have a thesis about what we needed to do in order to make this company successful. And it did follow on with diving in and recommitting to supporting founders earlier, because I think what we need to do, our remaining potential path forward, is to capture and provide value earlier than anybody else will, and make it easier for everybody else who does support startups to engage with them earlier efficiently in exchange for them, becoming better, more educated, easier to onboard clients in the future. That really was my thesis when I took over, and we made moves in that direction even more than we had prior, to say like, okay, we're going to dive in. We're going to provide support at a higher level than anybody else is willing to. We're going to learn from that and have that inform our product development and also have it build our brand at the earliest stages. So we become the go-to for people who don't have another solution. And, it is a longer play than you are able to pursue when you are completely venture funded. But it's one that we have the luxury of pursuing now that we are default alive. But it's also a blessing and a curse, right? It is a longer play. So it is sometimes harder to hold yourself accountable to short-term growth, which has definitely been one of the learning experiences from taking over. I don't want to bleed over into my potential life hack here, but taking over, I think when you move from engineering to product and you start to encounter different disciplinary lines, there's a tendency, especially when you're younger and earlier in your career, to believe that you can fix the problems that you perceive on the other side. And that's a really difficult lesson to learn. So, there was always a part of me when I straddled one of those boundaries where I was like, okay, if I have more perspective or more control from the other side, I'll be able to fix this. And learning that is not always true, and developing true empathy for what another discipline does and what the demands are and what the drivers are, I think has really been helpful for me as a human being.
Could you give an example or maybe double click on that a little bit more?
Yeah. So even from a product standpoint, talking to your customers and developing empathy with them, understanding how much that conversation actually needs to take place, how frequently, how open that line of communication has to be. You can hear about that as somebody who's developing software and think that you have an understanding of what it means. But when you actually hop the line and you are responsible for iterating the product in a way that drives revenue and that drives usage, the level of communication, understanding, and empathy you have to have there, you get a true understanding for it. And it was much more than I understood from the software engineering side.
Are you saying taking it from building products to really being responsible for growing the product and adoption and consumers really using it, that sort of thing, that jump?
Yep. Because I think on the engineering side and on the product development side, it can be easy to start to cultivate the belief that you know the customer without having to talk to them, right? That you know what they need. You have a vision for what the product should be. It's the classic, somebody coming to this from a builder standpoint, oh, I'm going to build it and I'm going to build the right thing. And because I built the right thing, lots of people are going to use it and buy it. You can understand that that's wrong without really innately understanding that that's wrong. And when you hop the line, it is a humbling experience to understand, okay, how much you did not understand the magnitude of what that actually means.
I'm sorry to be a little skeptical here. I was recently listening to a podcast. It's isn't Carta just a fancy spreadsheet? And so how hard is this product really? People are spending hundreds of millions of dollars building this product to manage cap tables and documents, which feels like you could do in Google Docs and Google Drive 90% of it. There'll be the skeptical point of view. And really the biggest driver is sales pounding the pavement. So I have my question is A, what do you think of that? And B,
yeah.
How do you focus on sales, right? Because it seems like that's a big part of it, and oftentimes engineers, have a hard time kind of transitioning to a sales, and especially product. Personally, I struggle with this because if the product doesn't do X, I have a really hard time, telling somebody, hey, it does X, which a lot of salespeople do. So yeah, what do you think of all that?
Selling the dream instead of the product is selling a step ahead. So I guess first where it comes to Carta, lots of things can be reduced to spreadsheets. A lot of software can be reduced to spreadsheets, right? And when it comes to cap tables, you are talking about one of the most important underpinnings of a company. Who owns it? So the fact that you can keep track of your equity in a spreadsheet doesn't mean that it's effective to do so from an ownership tracking, a taxation, and a compliance standpoint. As a company grows, those things do become more difficult. And then you have the additional question of okay, who's managing that spreadsheet? Who is responsible and taking responsibility for, making sure that everybody who's on the ledger actually has legal documentation that is approved by the board, approved by their spouse, and, actually reifies the grant and the terms that are on the spreadsheet. And traditionally that's been a paralegal or a lawyer, somebody who's very, very expensive. So if you target companies that have money and that have this problem at a scale where it really starts to hurt from a personnel standpoint, you can make a meaningful difference in the amount of human hours that you need to maintain that spreadsheet by building a single purpose spreadsheet. And that's really, I think, where the industry has been for a really long time, and what has allowed, Carta to be successful in the go-to-market strategy that they adopted, right? And a lot of these tools were go-to-market through the law firms and through the people managing the cap table, rather than to the founders themselves. Now we're in a fundamentally different capital environment. And I think because of the power law of VC and because of how the industry works, a lot of inefficiency is just abided. It's okay if a lot of companies don't have their shit together, because only a few of them are going to get to the point where real money is going to get injected and real value has been built. And at that point, they can be cleaned up. There's enough money to clean them up. Now, if you take a step back, you're like, okay, is there a different economic strategy and investing strategy that relies on more companies being successful, but less potential $10 billion companies being created? Is that same inefficiency going to work for that system? And our bet is that in that system, which is the one that we are trying to kind of create and foster from the bottoms up, that there is a meaningful financial benefit towards less companies failing for avoidable reasons in the early stages, and taking on at a smaller cost, because the technology is there, the ability to manage some of these early things in a way that, traditional unicorn track companies could safely ignore.
So what about sales? How do you think through your sales efforts as an engineer and product person? Are those in conflict?
Sure.
Or how?
Certainly, I think they were at different points. But once you take over the company, you don't have a choice. Over the course of when I took over, everybody started doing customer support again, and everybody started doing sales again. That was one of the first things that we did. And it forced us to relitigate our value propositions and determine, we didn't have the same sales team as we had before I took over. We had to rethink how we did things, and we had to come up with a new philosophy and a new process for how we led that. And it's all kind of tied back into that, okay, we are going to provide a higher level of support at earlier stages. And that became a big part of both how we sold and what we sold. So that was kind of a shift in our philosophy and our external presentation of like, okay, you're going to potentially get on the phone with the CEO again to get sold this product. And we're going to talk through what it does. And we're going to talk through how our support surface is different and what our software does. Really hone in on the fact that we are a supportive network of tools rather than a single purpose tool that you are expected to use with somebody who's going to charge you billable hours.
Technology is a kind of boom and bust industry. We had been in a very much a boom cycle for a long time, really. And COVID, I think, just added more fuel to the fire, even more boom.
Certainly.
Crazy high valuations, tons of VC money. Everybody was on Zoom. It's just like every company was getting funded. And then interest rates turn, some things turn. And the industry the last 2 years has been very, very different. I mean, you've mentioned kind of this return to profitability, which was a word that nobody ever talked about in technology, 5 years ago. What do you think of those things, and how has that impacted Gust?
So we've certainly seen an impact. And I think industry-wide, there has been an impact. I think AngelList reported a 40% year-over-year drop in corporations. We certainly saw a boom through COVID at that point. I think when layoffs were happening and when people were transitioning out of jobs, entrepreneurship, because of the froth in the market, seemed like a very attractive path to a lot of people. And we definitely saw that. And we've definitely seen it contract. And we're kind of looking now to see what is going to happen with technology businesses generally and how that's going to impact kind of the early stage. But certainly working with angel groups, like, deals are still getting done. Early stage deals are still getting done. People are still investing money. There is still money to invest. Certainly the dynamics of interest rates have changed that a little bit in terms of where capital is flowing. I think we've all seen the stats on total investment, but largely there is a shared belief as of now that this is more a return to normal of kind of pre-peak froth than it is any death knell for the early stage startup industry generally.
When we look at what's getting a lot of funding, or at least a lot of attention right now, AI and robotics, those two which, if I talk to 10 people about what AI is, I'm sure I'd get 8 different answers. So it's kind of unclear what AI really even is. But how do you see that both? Like, are you incorporating AI as part of your engineering team or as part of your team inside Gust itself? And also, how do you see it as part of is it a real thing in kind of the larger ecosystem?
I think it definitely is a real thing, but we're also in the earliest stages of it, right? So people are still trying to figure out what it's good for, and the number of people using it. When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Mm-hmm. We're in that part of the cycle, I think, for a large number of companies and a large number of end users. However, we've also made a fundamental change, I think, in information availability, the ability to coalesce large bodies of text and anything that can be effectively turned into text and easily search those things in a way that is more encoding of semantic meaning than it is of like the letters on a page. And I think that fundamentally changes things for a lot of different disciplines and a lot of companies. For a very long time, our special sauce is that we can answer any question across a variety of startup disciplines, verbally as humans. And now, like, it is a very real possibility for us to take that body of information and throw it into an LLM and provide those answers in a way that is probably 80% of what you get if you talk to us, but doesn't have to come from us. Stepping stones on that in terms of information availability to both internal employees and external end users. I think that's the most powerful thing that we've got right now. And then I think there's certainly a lot of interesting things happening in orchestration and task breakdown. I saw a really cool product the other week that reminded me of Yahoo Pipes way back in the day. Yeah. But then just kind of like, okay, what if Pipes also had, little pieces that are AI enabled, and how much more powerful would that make it? Turns out a lot more powerful. So I think for internal tools, there's a lot to be done there, and a lot of interesting things happening just in terms of document analysis and things like that.
Jason Fried runs 37 Signals. I was listening to a pod that he was on a couple of weeks ago, and he said, software comes in 20-year cycles. And the things like Yahoo Pipes, 20, 25 years ago, these things, they were maybe too early, or they were good ideas at the time, but the internet was a lot smaller, it was a lot different back then. Computing power was different, all these things. And so what was old is now new and hot again. And it feels like we're kind of in. But you talk about mentorship and when you could ask some of these questions, and some people listening to this pod, they're thinking of starting a business, or they're very, very early, and they don't have access to mentors with the expertise and experience of yourself. Like, when you're talking to these people in Nashville or otherwise, what kind of advice are you giving today to the founders just kind of starting out?
Yeah, I think the biggest advice that I would have is to learn how to think about an idea as a potential business before you start hacking on it, if your intention is to build a business. I think a lot of the folks I talk to are coming from individual contribution backgrounds, whether it be in product or engineering, especially now, understanding what the potential of a business is, how that overlaps with your personal goals, and what that means for your potential funding sources is a really good thing to do preemptively if you're deciding to go out on your own, especially if you're forgoing a traditional job in order to do that. That was over the course of the last 10 years. That is the biggest thing that I have learned, and really focusing in on how to do that well is, I think, a good place to be.
How does someone do that if they don't know how to do it? Right? Like, it's easier for you. You've done it. But how does somebody do it if if they don't have that expertise yet? Like, is there a question they should ask, or how do they actually do it?
I think there's a variety of tools and programs out there now. Gust runs one.
There you go.
Not to be too pluggy, yeah. But we started a program that we call Mission Control, which is meant to be kind of like the community and expert support at the earliest stages. If you have an idea and you don't know how to litigate it as a business, we can help. It's weekly office hours. It's expert sessions on financial modeling, nuts and bolts of incorporating a company, supported by our tools, other expert tools, all that jazz. You've also got things like YC Startup School, which has produced a ton of content. Gust has a ton of freely available content on how to do these things, and looking at things like the lean canvas to kind of map out your idea. But really, I think if you want to distill it down to two things that you can do without having to consume any other content, is talk a lot to the people who would potentially pay for your product. That's the biggest thing. if you're thinking about building something and you're not talking to the people that you expect to buy it, then you're not building a business. You're building a product.
Perfect. I think that's a great place to end there. We'll kind of wrap with a life hack. I can go first here. Mine's very different than tech. Well, I guess it involves tech. My grandparents on my father's side are still alive. So my grandmother, my grandfather. And somebody said to me, hey, I wish that before they passed, I had recorded a video of them. And so I did that. So they live in Kentucky. One of the times I was in Kentucky, two of the times I was in Kentucky, I just brought an iPad and I set it up and I asked that they're no longer together. So I asked them separately about some questions about their lives. And it was like very interesting. I have my dad there too. And my dad said, wow, both of them talked about things I've never heard them talk about, which is really neat. But also one of the things that happened is that my grandfather was in the Navy, and when we were talking, he said, I have this box of photos of me in the Navy, and he said it's in my closet. And so we were talking about it, and then I said, well, we're going to come back tomorrow, Grandpa. So I end the recording. We come back the next day, and the next day he had gotten the box down and had all the photos all over his room, his living room. And it was such a magical moment. He took pride in this. And so we'd pick up the photos and I'd say, well, who's this? And this is 60 years ago. And he says, oh, that's James. He was from St. Louis. He was 19. And he told these vivid stories. I just couldn't believe it. Clearly he was proud of his earlier years and all the travels he got to do. And it was a fantastic experience for me. And I have kids one day, and I want to be able to show them these stories and not just hear them from me. So I'd highly recommend for anyone out there who has living grandparents. I'm going to do this with my parents now soon too. It's easy to do with an iPad and just have them talk, just ask questions and have them talk. My grandfather, he was they were both leery of being on video. That's why I did it with an iPad, like purposely. So a phone, like they all know, like a phone is recording video. The iPad's like a little bit more, it just sits there.
My hack is Kubera, Kubera. It's this new app to track all your assets. It's like more like financial related. But what's cool about Kubera is it tracks all I think it was started by Web3, like crypto people, because it's got integrations with all the crypto stuff and Coinbase and tracks all that stuff, which I found it really hard to track because there are all these different exchanges and they never tell you kind of what prices things are at. But it integrates with everything, and it's quite a nice interface. I recommend it for those of you that want to closely track financial stuff, including the crypto bull market that's happening right now.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna throw back to Taylor's real quick, because Taylor, I don't know if you've seen Storyworth, but we did that with my dad, and it basically, I don't exactly know what the interface looks like from his side, but Storyworth basically sends a set of structured questions to your relative on a regular basis, and they respond via email, and then at the end they coalesce it all into a book. Eventually they'll probably get into video, but same kind of outcomes. Like stories we'd never heard, got to see my dad's writing as a storyteller, which was like amazing. So same kind of outcomes, and kind of relieves you of the necessity to come up with the questions, which can sometimes be a big blocker, maybe for people who don't have a podcast. Let's see, personal life hack. I would say over the past 6 months, I have rediscovered the fact that I used to know early on in my career, that maintaining like friendships and relationships with people who are doing cool stuff that is tangential to your work, and not just being myopically focused on building a business, is actually a way better way to build a business. So don't neglect your personal and work tangential relationships. Plug into those, provide value first, talk with other humans. I think we all lost a lot of that during COVID. It's surprising how important, fulfilling, and impactful it is, even when you're trying to build a business.
What a great place to end. Peter, how can people reach out to you? How can they find Gust? Anything you want to plug? Yeah, how can people find out more about you?
I'm Peter at Gust.com. Feel free to send me emails. Gust is at Gust.com. If you're a founder thinking about starting something and are intimidated by all the nuts and bolts or lack of knowledge about how startups work, Gust.com/mission-control is the spot for you. You can find us via chat on the website. It's possible you'll get me. So yeah, come find us if you're thinking about starting something or thinking about investing in something, and we'll help you find the right path.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to meet you guys.
The water's fine, homie, jump into the deep end. Sow it, you will reap it. We talking how to start it, how to grow it, how to keep it. Take a deep breath. You are now rocking with Founder Secrets.